The vote to exile Earth approved. Then humanity made their rules clear. The hall was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. 417 species sat in the curved tiers of the grand chamber, their translator chips blinking in steady green rhythms, their eyes, some compound, some like black glass, some that moved independently in their skulls, all aimed at the central dais where the Archivist Prime stood. I was the only human in the room. I had been the only human in the room for 6 hours. And in those 6 hours, the fate of 8 billion people had been decided without a single one of them being allowed to speak. My name is Yael Doran. I was Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Conclave. I want to be precise about that past tense. I was. The Archivist Prime was a tall, thin creature with a body like pale driftwood, and a voice that somehow reached every corner of the chamber without effort. It had no visible mouth. It never did. The sound came from somewhere deep in its chest, low and resonant, like a note struck on an instrument made of stone. The final count, it said, stands at 417 in favor of the exile decree. 1 abstention, 0 opposing votes. I did not flinch. I had promised myself I would not. The abstention was Priel Vaughn, of the Uvari delegation. I had watched him sit perfectly still during the vote, his 6 fingers flat on the table in front of him, his pale amber eyes fixed on a point somewhere above my head. He had not voted to keep Earth in the conclave, but he had not voted to remove us either. For the Uvari, in that room, on that day, that was as close to friendship as anyone could offer. I had walked into the grand chamber that morning with a prepared speech. 43 minutes of careful, researched, legally sound argument. I had spent 9 weeks writing it. I had cross-referenced every article of conclave charter law. I had pulled precedents from species who had faced similar proceedings and survived them. I had even included, in the final section, a modest proposal for a joint oversight committee that would allow the conclave to monitor Earth's behavior over a defined period. I never gave it. The conclave had voted before I arrived. The session I had been invited to attend was not a hearing. It was a notification. Delegate Sorun Keth, of the Keth Sorun Collective, had spoken last, before the vote was formalized. He was a large being, broad-shouldered by the standards of his species, with a face that had the quality of hammered bronze. His voice was calm and precise in a way that felt more threatening than anger ever could. The humans, he said, have survived their own extinction 7 times by our count. 3 natural catastrophes, 2 self-inflicted crises, 1 engineered biological event, 1 collapse of their primary food system. They survived all of it. They adapted. They rebuilt. We have debated, in this chamber, whether that resilience is a virtue or a danger. He paused. We have concluded it is a danger. A species that cannot be stopped by any force, internal or external, is not a species. It is a variable. And the conclave does not govern variables. It governs members. The room had agreed. So here I stood, in the silence after the vote, holding a small data crystal that the chamber attendant had pressed into my hand with the kind of careful politeness usually reserved for funerals. It was the farewell packet, standard issue apparently for exiled species. It contained the formal language of the exile decree, a list of the impound schedules for human vessels currently operating in conclave space, and I almost smiled at this, a message from the conclave's wellness division, expressing sincere regret at the outcome and wishing Earth a peaceful future. Wellness division. They had a wellness division. The attendant, a young Marath with copper-colored scales and large nervous eyes, was waiting for me to say something. They always waited. Every species in this building had been trained for centuries to wait for the response of the aggrieved party. There were protocols for grief. There were procedures for anger. There were entire subchapters of conclave diplomatic law dedicated to managing the emotional fallout of an exile vote, because it had happened before, and it always ended the same way, with a species going silent, withdrawing, and eventually fading into the long catalog of civilizations that the conclave had decided were too dangerous or too broken to keep in its circle. I looked at the attendant. I looked at the crystal in my hand. I looked up at the tiers of the Grand Chamber, where 417 species were watching me, with the patient attention of people who already knew how this story ended. I put the crystal in my coat pocket. "Thank you," I said to the attendant, in the flat and level voice of someone who had just decided something very quietly and very permanently. And then I walked out. No speech, no protest, no tears and no raised voices, and no dramatic final statement to be recorded in the conclave archives. Just footsteps on polished stone and the sound of 417 species exhaling in what I assumed was relief. They thought silence was defeat. They had never met anyone from Earth. In the corridor outside the Grand Chamber, I opened a line to Director Owen Marsh back in Geneva. He picked up in 3 seconds. He had been watching. "I saw," he said. "Yes. Are you all right?" I thought about that for a moment. The corridor was empty. The light in this section of the conclave complex was blue-white, the kind that made everyone look slightly unwell. "I'm fine," I said. "Call the council. Tell them we need to meet. Tell them not to make any public statements yet." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where we stop talking about what happened to us and start talking about what happens next." There was a pause on the line. Owen Marsh had been in diplomatic service for 30 years. He had the patience of a man who had survived many meetings, and the instincts of one who understood when a situation had changed, in a way that couldn't be reversed. "Understood," he said. "How long do we have?" "The impound schedule starts in 72 hours. And are people in deep space? That's what the meeting is about." I ended the call and kept walking. Somewhere behind me, the Grand Chamber was beginning its next session. Another species. Another agenda item. The smooth machinery of interstellar governance rolling forward without any adjustment whatsoever for the thing that had just happened. The conclave was very good at moving on. It had been doing it for 11,000 years. What it was not good at, what it had never had to be good at, was dealing with a species that didn't accept the story it had been put in. I passed through the outer vestibule of the complex, where 2 conclave security officers stood in their pale gray uniforms. One of them looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. The other looked at the floor. I stepped out into the open air of Conclave Station 7, where the sky was the color of deep water, and 3 different moons hung in various stages of rising, and I stood there for exactly 4 seconds. Then I went to work. The 72-hour window was not a mercy. The conclave had given it as procedure, the standard grace period written into exile law so that no species could later claim they had been expelled without warning. It was meant to give the exiled party time to accept what had happened, begin their withdrawal, and avoid any incidents that might complicate the formal record. What it actually gave us was 3 days. I boarded the next transit shuttle to the human diplomatic residence on the far side of the station, and spent the 4-minute ride writing a list on a physical notepad I carried everywhere. Old habit. My mother had kept notepads. Her mother before that. There was something about writing with your hand that helped the brain organize itself in a way that screens never quite matched. The list had 12 items on it by the time the shuttle stopped. The first item was, contact every human vessel in conclave space. The second item was, do not let any of them be impounded. The third item was, call Owen. I had already done the third one. I looked at the list. 12 items. 3 days. 417 species who had just decided, in the most formal way their civilization allowed, that humanity was no longer their problem. I capped my pen. They had made a very simple error, and I suspected they would spend a long time figuring out what it was. They had assumed that exile meant removal. They had forgotten that humans had spent 100,000 years being removed from places, and that somewhere in our long, stubborn, improbable history, we had learned something important. Removal only works if the removed party agrees to stay removed. We did not agree. The shuttle that took me back to the human diplomatic residence was a standard conclave transit pod. Oval, pale gray, seats for 8, no windows. I had ridden it 100 times over 4 years. I sat in it alone this time and thought about the word that Sorun Keth had used. Variable. I kept returning to it the way your tongue returns to a sore tooth. Not because it hurt, but because it was interesting. They had debated whether our survival was a virtue or a danger, and concluded it was a danger. I understood the logic. I even respected it, in a detached kind of way. The Conclave had been governing interstellar civilization for 11,000 years by maintaining a certain kind of order. Predictable, structured, graduated. Species that fit the model were members. Species that didn't were not. It was a reasonable system for the kind of galaxy it had been built to manage. The problem was that humanity didn't fit any model that had ever been built to contain it. The Conclave had made its calculation using what it knew about us. It had not calculated what we would do when forced to operate entirely outside its framework. Those are two very different calculations. The pod arrived at the diplomatic residence level, and I stepped out into a corridor that smelled faintly of recycled air and the particular cleaning compound the Conclave used on all its floors, which had a faint medicinal quality that I had never fully gotten used to. Two of my staff were waiting, Clara Holm, my communications director, and Ben Vasquez, who handled logistics and was the kind of person who was most valuable, precisely when things were most complicated. Clara spoke first. The council in Geneva wants a full briefing. Schedule it for 6 hours from now. I need time to prepare what I want to say. And the press? Nothing. No comments, no statements. Not until I've spoken to the council. Ben handed me a tablet. This is the list of human vessels currently in Conclave space. I've been updating it as ships check in. We're at 31 confirmed so far. Probably more we haven't reached. I looked at the list. 31 ships, various sizes, various crew numbers, various cargo and purposes. A research ship, 11 freight carriers, 3 passenger vessels, a medical support ship on assignment near the Marath outer system, a repair crew working on a Uvari transit relay, which was a detail that I immediately recognized as significant, and which I set aside to think about more carefully in the next hour. Keep the list updated, I told Ben. And I want a separate column showing what each ship is currently doing, not just location, purpose. He made a note. I walked the rest of the corridor to my office and sat down at my desk. The desk was functional and slightly too large for the space, which was a recurring problem with the human diplomatic residence, because it had been built to Conclave standard dimensions, and we kept bringing things that were our own size. I had stopped apologizing for it after the first year. I set the data crystal on the corner of the desk, the farewell packet, sitting there in the pale office light like a very small, very self-satisfied problem. I looked at it for exactly as long as it took me to decide that I was not going to open it. Not today. Possibly not ever. It contained the Conclave's version of this story, and I was no longer in the business of accepting other people's versions. I opened my notepad and started the list that would eventually become the foundation document for the Soul Compact. At the time, I did not know that. I just knew I needed to write down what we had, what we needed, and what we were going to do. It was a long list. I was working on it when the first message came in from Owen, telling me that the council was ready whenever I was. I wrote 2 more items on the list before I called him back. Old habit. The call came through on Commander Rin Osei's personal line at 3 in the morning, ship time, and she was already awake. She had been awake for 2 hours. Sleep had stopped being easy 6 days ago, when the first rumors out of the Conclave started moving through the back channels that human traders used when they needed to say things they didn't want logged. The rumors had been specific and consistent. The vote was coming, the numbers were bad, and Earth had no allies in that room who would actually stand up and be counted. Rin had listened to those rumors while running the standard maintenance checks on the Audacity's engines, while eating reconstituted protein meals in the small galley at the back of the ship, while lying in her bunk in the dark listening to the low hum of life support systems that she had personally rebuilt twice in the 7 years she had captained this vessel. She was not a diplomat. She was not a politician. She was a woman who moved cargo between star systems for a living, and she was very, very good at it. The Audacity was a mid-range freighter, technically past its recommended service life, with a crew of 11 people who trusted her completely, because she had earned that trust by never once making a decision that got any of them killed. When the call came in, she sat up and accepted it without hesitation. It was Yael Doran. Rin had met the ambassador twice in person, once at a trade conference on Uvari Station, and once at a memorial service for a human cargo pilot who had died when his ship's cooling system failed in deep transit. Both times, she had come away with the same impression. This was a woman who understood the difference between a situation that was bad and a situation that was over, and she never confused the two. The vote passed, Yael said. She did not say it gently. She said it the way you say something when you need the person on the other end to process it fast and move on. I know, Rin said. I've been watching the feeds. Where are you right now? About 9 hours from Uvari Station 7. I'm carrying medical equipment, bioscanners and surgical tools for the Uvari Northern Colony. Scheduled delivery in 2 days. Don't deliver. Rin was quiet for a moment. That's a breach of contract. I know. Uvari medical contracts have penalty clauses. I know that too. Rin looked at the ceiling of her cabin. The Audacity groaned softly around her, the way old ships do in transit. Not a dangerous sound, just a familiar one. The voice of a machine that had been pushed through a lot of dark and come out the other side. What do you need me to do? She asked. I need you to stop where you are and hold your position. Don't go to Uvari Station 7. Don't proceed to any conclave facility. Find a neutral point in space and sit there. For how long? 3 days, maybe less. I'm trying to reach every human vessel currently in conclave space. There are 43 that we know of, maybe more that haven't checked in through official channels. And after 3 days? After 3 days, we'll know what we're doing. Rin stood up from her bunk and walked the 3 steps to the small porthole above her desk. Outside was the standard view of deep space, black and enormous, scattered with the fixed, patient light of stars that didn't care at all about the political arrangements of any civilization. She had spent most of her adult life looking at that view. It had never once seemed threatening to her. The impound order, she said. The 72-hour window. Yes. If I'm still in conclave space when it expires, they can legally board my ship. Yes. And my cargo is Uvari medical equipment. There was a brief pause on the line. I'm aware of what that means. If they board me and find Uvari cargo that wasn't delivered, the Uvari could file a separate claim. That's not just the conclave coming after me. That's a client species with a legitimate grievance. Rin, I'm not saying no. I'm just laying out the full picture. I know the picture. I need you to trust me that I'm working on it. Rin turned away from the porthole. All right, she said. I'll hold position, but I want to check in every 6 hours, and I want to know the moment you have a plan. You'll be the first call I make. The line closed. Rin stood in her cabin for a moment longer, then pulled on her jacket and walked forward through the narrow corridor of the Audacity, past the sleeping quarters where most of her crew was resting, past the small engine monitoring station, where her chief engineer, a quiet, sharp-eyed man named Danny Cole, was reading on a tablet. Danny looked up when she appeared. He had the particular quality of someone who could read a room by reading one face, and the face he was reading now told him everything he needed to know. We stopping? He asked. We're holding position. Kill the advance burn. Find us a stable point at least 2 light hours from any registered conclave facility. Danny put down his tablet without asking any further questions. That was one of the things she valued most about him. Rin went to the forward galley and made coffee. Real coffee, which she kept in a sealed container that cost more per kilogram than the bioscanners in her cargo hold. She poured 2 cups, handed one to Danny through the engine station door, and took hers to the pilot's seat at the front of the ship. The Audacity slowed its burn and began the gentle adjustment to a holding pattern. Through the forward window, the stars shifted almost imperceptibly, the way the world looks when you're no longer going anywhere but you haven't yet decided where to go. She opened her crew channel. All 11 names appeared on the screen, 8 of them showing the blue dot that meant they were asleep, 3 active. She thought about what to say for exactly as long as it took her to finish the first half of her coffee. Then she opened the channel. This is Osei. Everyone needs to be awake in the next 20 minutes. When you're up, come forward. I have something to tell you. And I want to tell all of you at once, so nobody hears it secondhand from someone else. 8 blue dots turned green within 4 minutes. When they were all crowded into the forward section of the ship, 11 people in a space designed for comfortable occupation by 3, Rin told them what had happened. She was direct and she was factual, and she did not dramatize any of it, because 11 people standing in a tight space in deep space didn't need drama, they needed information. When she finished, the ship was very quiet. Nina Walsh, her navigation officer and the youngest person on the crew at 24, spoke first. So we're exiles. The conclave says so. What do we say? Rin looked at her. We're figuring that out. But we're not just going home, said George Ash, who ran the cargo systems and had been with Rin for 5 years. It wasn't a question. We're holding position, Rin said. Ambassador Doran is coordinating. 43 ships, maybe more. We're not the only ones out here. 43 ships versus the conclave, said Danny, from the back of the group. Nobody said anything about versus. Then what? Rin finished her coffee and set the cup down on the instrument panel with a small, definitive sound. We wait for the call, and in the meantime, we don't move. We don't transmit on any conclave frequency, and we stay out of their logs. As far as the official record is concerned, the Audacity is a navigational ghost. She looked around the room. 11 faces, none of them afraid, all of them alert in the careful way of people who had spent years working in environments where calm thinking was the difference between coming home and not coming home. Questions? There were a few. She answered them all. When the group dispersed back to their stations, George Ash lingered for a moment. Cap, he said. George, you know what's actually in that medical shipment? The bioscanners? I know what the manifest says. The Uvari bioscanners, the ones in our hold, they're designed around Uvari biology. Nobody else in this region of space can use them. The calibration is species-specific. If the northern colony doesn't get those tools on schedule, their medical team is running blind for at least the next 3 months. Rin looked at him steadily. I know, she said. George nodded slowly. So the conclave voted to exile the species that was literally carrying medicine to one of their member worlds. Yes. He shook his head, not in anger but in something closer to tired amazement. All right then, he said, and went back to his station. Rin sat alone in the pilot's seat. Outside, the stars were patient and indifferent and vast, the same as always. Somewhere out there, 42 other human ships were doing the same thing she was doing. Holding still, waiting, running through their own calculations. And somewhere back on Earth, 8 billion people were waking up to the news. She had a feeling that the galactic conclave, 11,000 years old and extraordinarily confident in its own processes, had made a very specific kind of error. Not the error of choosing wrong. The error of choosing and assuming the chosen party would simply accept the outcome. Rin had been in enough difficult situations to know the difference between a problem and a solved problem. This was not a solved problem. Her communicator chimed. It was the first of many messages that would arrive over the next 6 hours, from human ships scattered across the galaxy, all of them asking the same basic question in different words. What do we do now? She began to answer them, one by one, patiently and precisely, the way she ran her ship. The way she had always run her ship. Somewhere in the deep channels of the conclave's communication network, Yael Doran was doing the same thing, but on a much larger scale. And somewhere in Geneva, in a building that had survived more versions of the future than anyone had ever planned for, Secretary General Amara Voss was sitting at a long table with her advisors, looking at the same information everyone was looking at, and beginning to put words to something that had never been written before. The 72-hour window was ticking. Nobody on the human side was using that time to pack. On the 4th hour, a new ship appeared on the Audacity's passive sensor grid, a Uvari light transport, running quiet. It held its position about 800 kilometers off the Audacity's port side. After 40 minutes of silence, a communication came through on a Uvari frequency that Rin technically wasn't supposed to be monitoring. It was from the station master of Uvari Station 7. His name was Priel Vaughn, which Rin recognized from the Exile vote records as the one who had abstained. The message was short. It said, "Your cargo is still needed. When you are ready, the docking bay will be open. We do not ask for paperwork during difficult times." Rin read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Yael Doran with a single line of her own. "Not everyone voted to forget us." The response came back 20 minutes later. "No, not everyone. Hold position. 2 more hours and we'll have the full count. Then we'll know what 43 ships can do." Rin leaned back in her pilot's seat. Outside, the stars were still there. They were very good at that. On hour 6, the full count came in. 46 human vessels. 3 more than Yael had expected, 2 of which were running dark without conclave transponders, and 1 of which turned out to be a research ship that everyone on Earth thought had returned to the solar system months ago. 46 ships, 11 to 208 crew members each, all of them scattered across conclave space, all of them waiting. 46 reasons the galactic conclave was about to discover that exiling a species is not the same as removing them. Rin set her mug down, pulled up her navigation chart, and began the calculation for a rendezvous point that would put the Audacity alongside 22 other human ships in the same patch of empty space, far enough from any conclave facility to be technically outside their immediate jurisdiction, close enough to respond quickly to anything that needed responding to. She ran the numbers twice, confirmed them with Nina at navigation, and then set the course. The Audacity moved. Not back toward Earth, not toward a conclave docking facility, toward something new. Behind her, in the cargo hold, 40 cases of Uvari bioscanners sat in their shipping brackets, patient and waiting, belonging to a species that had not voted to exile the people carrying them. Rin made a note in her personal log, not for the record, just for herself. It said, "Day 1 of whatever comes next. Crew is steady. Ship is ready. 46 of us out here and counting. I don't know what the plan is yet, but I know this. We are not leaving on anyone else's schedule." She closed the log. The Audacity moved through the dark, and the stars did not care, and the galaxy turned the way it always had, and somewhere in the distance, a clock was counting down 72 hours. But the people it was counting down for were not watching it the way the conclave expected them to. They were building something while it ran. On the 5th hour, something happened that Rin had not anticipated. She was reviewing the communications log when Nina Walsh appeared at the door of the pilot's seat area, with a tablet in her hand, and an expression that was halfway between alarmed and genuinely impressed. "Cap," Nina said, "you should look at this." The tablet showed a feed from the Galactic Public Channel, the broad-spectrum broadcast that any species with a standard receiver could pick up. Most of what moved through that channel was conclave administrative traffic, shipping advisories, and the occasional automated relay from a deep space monitoring station. What was moving through it now was different. It was Ambassador Doran's broadcast of the Sol Compact terms, playing in full, clean, and unobstructed, on a channel that the conclave had no mechanism to block, because it had never needed to block anything on that channel before. Someone was rebroadcasting it. Rin checked the signal origin. It traced back to a relay station in the Uvari outer system, technically Uvari infrastructure, privately operated, which meant it was outside the conclave's direct control. The Uvari who operated it hadn't filed any notification. They had simply turned the relay on and pointed it at the public channel and let it run. "How many species can receive on that frequency?" Rin asked. 312 with standard equipment, Nina said. More if they have extended receivers, which most of the older civilizations do. Rin looked at the feed. Amara Voss's voice was clear and level, laying out the 3 terms of the Sol Compact in language that left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. She had always admired that about the Secretary General. The woman could speak precisely without sounding cold, which was a very specific skill. 312 species, Rin said again, listening to our terms. Live. George Ash had appeared in the doorway behind Nina. He was listening too. You know what that means, he said. Rin knew. It meant that the conclave's emergency session, which had certainly been convened the moment Yael Doran walked out of the grand chamber, was not happening in the quiet that the conclave preferred for its internal debates. It was happening with 312 species already knowing what humanity's position was, in humanity's own words, before the conclave had a chance to frame it any other way. The conclave had spent 11,000 years controlling the narrative of every diplomatic situation it managed. They were very good at it. They had entire departments dedicated to ensuring that when information left their chambers, it left in the form and at the time they chose. This had happened before they could do any of that. Carl, Rin said. Already on it, he replied from his station. Running a passive monitor on the public channel and all adjacent frequencies. If anyone responds, we'll catch it. The first response came 40 minutes later. It was from a species called the Marath, the copper-scaled beings that Rin had seen at various port stops, quiet and careful, and observant in the way of people who had survived as a mid-tier civilization by paying very close attention to everything around them. The Marath transmission was addressed to no one specific, broadcast on the same public channel, and it said simply, "We have received and logged the Sol Compact terms. We have no comment at this time." It was not support, it was not opposition, but it was acknowledgement, an acknowledgement from a species that had just been told by the conclave that the humans were exiles whose statements had no diplomatic standing. The Marath had just given those statements diplomatic standing by acknowledging them. 40 minutes after that, 2 more species did the same. Different words, same effect. Danny Cole appeared at the galley entrance with a fresh mug in each hand. He passed one to Rin without a word and then stood next to the pilot's seat, watching the sensor screen and the communications display with the steady attention of someone who was tracking several things at once. "You know," he said after a while, "when I signed on to run engines for a cargo ship, I did not expect the job description to include watching galactic politics shift in real time." "You want combat pay?" Rin said. "I want the story to have a good ending." She took a sip from the mug. The coffee was exactly right, which was the benefit of working with someone who had spent 7 years learning exactly how you took it. "Keep watching," she told him. "I think the ending is still being written." On the communications panel, a new signal appeared. This one was from the Audacity's own conclave frequency monitor, passive, just listening. It showed elevated traffic between the Keth Soren command channel and the conclave administrative relay. More transmissions in the last 2 hours than the previous 6 days combined. Someone was very busy. Rin watched it and felt something settle into place inside her, a kind of certainty that wasn't based on any specific piece of information, but on the overall shape of what she was seeing. She had felt it before, in difficult transit situations where the sensor data, and the feel of the ship and the data from 3 years of running this particular route, all combined into a single clear picture. The picture now was this. The conclave had voted expecting silence. They were getting the opposite of silence. And the opposite of silence, in a governance body that had operated for 11,000 years on the assumption that the removed stayed removed, was something they did not have a good procedure for. They would have to invent one. And in the time it took them to do that, 46 human ships were holding position. 1 Uvari relay station was running a broadcast. 3 species had sent acknowledgments on the public channel, and Secretary General Amara Voss's voice was still moving outward at the speed of light, reaching further and further into the galaxy with every passing minute. The 72-hour window was down to 51 hours. Nobody on the human side was using it to leave. Secretary General Amara Voss did not sleep the night before the broadcast. Not because she was afraid. She had been afraid before, many times, in situations that had required her to stand in front of large groups of people and say things that could not be unsaid. She knew what fear felt like, and she had learned, through years of practice, how to work alongside it rather than against it. What kept her awake that night was something different. It was the awareness of a specific moment, the kind that arrives only a few times in a century, where the words said in the next 24 hours will be studied by people not yet born. She sat at the table in her private office in Geneva, with a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, and a notepad in front of her, and she wrote and crossed out, and rewrote until the words were right. Not polished, not diplomatic, right. Her advisor, a precise and steady man named Philip Grant, who had been with her through 2 crises before this one, arrived at 6 in the morning with fresh coffee and a question. "How long?" he asked. "How long what?" "The broadcast. How long is it?" She looked at her notes. "As long as it needs to be. 12 minutes, maybe 14. Philip sat down across from her. "The council wants to review the text before transmission." "I know. They're concerned about the language in the 3rd section." "I know that too." "Amara." "Philip." She looked at him across the table. "The conclave voted 417 to 0. 0. Not a single species in that room stood up for us. In 4 years of diplomatic work, in 200 years of interstellar contact, not one ally. That number tells me something." "What does it tell you?" "It tells me that we have been trying to be accepted by a body that was never going to accept us. And it tells me that continuing to behave as if acceptance is possible and desirable is a kind of," she searched for the right word, "a kind of untruth that I'm no longer willing to perform." Philip was quiet for a moment. He was good at being quiet. It was one of the reasons she trusted him. "The council will ask you to soften the 3rd section," he said, "and I will listen to them. And then I will transmit what I have written." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure the technical team is ready." At 9 in the morning, Geneva time, Amara Voss walked into the broadcast chamber and sat down in front of the transmission equipment that would carry her voice, simultaneously, to every human communication device on Earth, and to every human vessel in deep space, and, through the relay networks that humanity had built quietly and incrementally over 60 years of interstellar presence, to every corner of conclave space where a signal could reach. She had been told by the communications team that the broadcast would also be received and almost certainly monitored by approximately 340 conclave-aligned species, including the Keth Soren. "Good," she had said. That was the point. The broadcast light turned green. She looked at the camera. She did not look at her notes. She had memorized what she wanted to say, and the few lines she had not fully memorized, she trusted herself to find when she arrived at them. "My name is Amara Voss," she said. "I am the Secretary General of the United Earth Assembly. 4 days ago, the Galactic Conclave passed the Exile Decree, removing humanity from membership in their interstellar body by a vote of 417 to 0. I want to speak to every human being alive right now about what that means and about what comes next." She paused for exactly 2 seconds. "First, what it means. It means that a group of species, some of whom have traded with us, received our medical support, used our engineering knowledge, and shared our technology for 2 centuries, have decided that we are too unpredictable to remain in their company." The specific word used in the chamber was variable. We are not a species, by their assessment. We are a variable. I want you to remember that word, because I think it is actually the most honest thing anyone in that chamber said about us. She let that land. We are unpredictable. We have surprised the galaxy before, and we will again. We have survived things no reasonable civilization would have survived. We have built tools in times of shortage, found paths when there were no paths, and refused to stop when stopping was the most logical thing to do. They are not wrong about any of that. What they are wrong about is what it means. Her voice was steady, not raised, not performing, simply steady. What comes next? She turned a page in front of her, not because she needed to read it, but because the physical gesture marked the shift. Effective immediately, the United Earth Assembly is establishing what we are calling the Sol Compact. The Sol Compact is not an application for readmission to the Galactic Conclave. It is not a protest, a petition, or a request. It is a framework. It is how we will operate going forward. And I want to be clear about its 3 core terms, because these terms are not internal documents. They are public. I am stating them now in full, on open broadcast, to every species in this galaxy that is receiving this signal. The room was completely silent. The small team of technicians and advisors standing at the edges of the chamber were not breathing loudly enough to be heard. Term 1. Any vessel, fleet, or armed force belonging to any conclave member species that takes direct action against a human ship, human crew, or human settlement will receive a response. That response will not be proportional to the attacking force. It will be proportional to the total military capacity of the species that authorized the attack. This is not a threat of unprovoked aggression. It is a statement of our response doctrine. We are telling you in advance, clearly and simply, so that there is no confusion when it happens. She could feel, somewhere in the atmosphere of the room, the held breath of the entire planet. Term 2. Any species that previously held a trade, medical, or technical relationship with humanity and voted in favor of the Exile decree may request the restoration of that relationship. We are open to those conversations. However, the terms of any restored relationship will be set by us, not by the Conclave Charter. If you want what we offer, you will negotiate with us directly, as equals, without the Conclave as an intermediary. She turned the page again. This was the section Philip had been worried about. She did not hesitate. Term 3. Human vessels currently operating in Conclave space will continue to operate in Conclave space. The 72-hour impound window established by the Exile decree is not recognized by the United Earth Assembly as legally binding on our vessels or our citizens. We are not Conclave members, and therefore Conclave impound law does not apply to us. Should any Conclave member species attempt to board, detain, or seize a human vessel, we will apply a simple principle. For every human vessel seized, 2 vessels of the seizing species will be held in return. We have the capacity to do this. We are prepared to do this. We would prefer not to, but we will. She looked directly at the camera. I want to say something now that is not in any official document. I want to say it as a human being, not as a Secretary General. She folded her hands on the table in front of her. We were told we are a variable. We are told we are too difficult to govern, too unpredictable to trust, too likely to do something surprising. And I want to say to the 417 species who made that argument, and to anyone else listening, you are right. We are all of those things. We are also the species that will carry your medicine when you are sick, fix your systems when they fail, find solutions when your best minds say there are none, and stand next to you in the dark when something threatens both of us. We have done all of those things. We did them as members. We will continue to do them, but we will do them on our own terms, and we will not apologize for the fact that our terms involve being treated as a civilization that has something to offer, not as a problem to be managed. She stood up. She had not planned to stand, but it felt right. The Sol Compact is open. Any species, Conclave member or otherwise, that wishes to engage with humanity outside the Conclave structure may contact the United Earth Assembly through standard diplomatic channels. We are not hiding. We are not retreating. We are not gone. She reached for the broadcast control and paused with her hand over it. One more thing. To the Uvari delegate who abstained in that chamber, the medical shipment you were expecting will be delivered within 24 hours. The people carrying it do not let medicine sit in a hold when someone needs it. That is also who we are. She switched off the broadcast. In the silence that followed, Philip Grant stood at the edge of the room looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. Well, he said after a moment. Yes. The council is going to have thoughts. They always do. The Keth Soren Grand Speaker is going to call it an act of aggression. Probably. And the conclave is going to convene an emergency session. Amara picked up her cold tea and took a sip of it. Let them. An emergency session means they're listening. And they're only listening because they didn't expect us to have anything to say. She set the mug down and walked toward the door. Get me Owen Marsh at the diplomatic office, she said over her shoulder. And get me the captain of the ship carrying those Uvari bioscanners. I want to make sure that delivery happens on time. Behind her, on the screens that lined the broadcast room walls, the feeds from across the planet were already showing the response. Cities, communities, gatherings of people looking at screens. Across 46 human ships scattered through the dark, 11 to 200 crew members each, the same broadcast had played, and the same stillness had followed. And then, one by one, voices had risen into something that was not celebration and was not rage. It was recognition. The galaxy had called them a variable. They had just proven the galaxy right. Philip left the room. The broadcast technicians began their shutdown routine. Amara stood alone at the transmission table for a moment, in the quiet that follows a very large thing being done and not yet absorbed. She was thinking about the third term. The third term was the one that Philip had flagged. The one the council had debated for 6 hours before she had listened to all of their concerns, thanked each member individually, and kept it in unchanged. Not out of stubbornness, out of the understanding that a position stated with qualifications is not a position. It is an opening offer, and she was not here to open negotiations. She was here to establish ground. There was a difference, and she had spent 26 years in this work learning to feel it. Her personal communicator buzzed. The first response was already coming in. Not from a conclave species, from a news network, a human one, based in Lagos, running a live reaction desk. She let it go to her assistant. There would be 100 of those in the next hour. The second buzz was from Owen Marsh. She picked up. "Already?" she said. "The Keth Sorun diplomatic office has been trying to reach our frequency for the last 8 minutes, Owen said. He was in the communications center 3 floors down, and she could hear the particular quality of controlled urgency in his voice that meant several things were happening simultaneously, and he was managing all of them. They're calling it a provocation and requesting an emergency clarification session. Not yet, she said. They're going to keep calling. I know, not yet. Give it 8 hours. Let the broadcast reach everywhere it's going to reach before we have any bilateral conversation with anyone. The terms stand as stated. There's nothing to clarify. Understood. A pause. The Uvari relay station broadcast. Did we authorize that? No. Do we need to address it? She thought about it for 3 seconds. Send a private message to the Uvari station operator, thanking them for their continued support of open communication in the galaxy. Don't make it official. Keep it personal. And if the conclave asks whether we authorized it, we didn't. That's a true statement, and we can make it. She heard the sound of Owen writing something. He had an old-fashioned keyboard that made a quiet clicking sound. She found it oddly reassuring. Captain Osei's message came in, he said. The Uvari station master, Priel Vaughn, has confirmed that the docking bay will be open for the Audacity whenever she's ready. Good. Tell Osei she can proceed with the delivery when she's comfortable with the security picture. Her call. She's already moving. She started the transit 20 minutes ago. Amara almost smiled. She had never met Rin Osei in person, but she had read the woman's file twice in the past 3 days, and the picture that emerged was of someone who made decisions when she had enough information, and did not wait for permission when the decision was clearly correct. Good, she said. Thank you, Owen. She ended the call and walked to the window of the broadcast room. The city of Geneva was visible below. Rooftops and water, and the particular pale morning light of early spring. She had lived here for 11 years. She had raised 2 children here, sent them to school here, argued with her husband here, in 3 languages depending on how important the argument was. This city had survived things that would have ended most places, and it was still here. And the people in it were waking up right now to the news of what the conclave had done and what had been said in response. She wondered what they were thinking. Not in the political sense, not the analysis and the reaction and the assessment, in the simple, personal sense. What it felt like to be an ordinary person, in an ordinary city, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and learn that the galaxy had voted to remove you from its community, and then to hear, 8 minutes later, that someone had said no. She had tried to write the broadcast in a way that an ordinary person would understand. Not the legal language, not the diplomatic framework, but the actual content underneath it. We are not going away. We were not asking to stay. We are simply going to be here, and we are going to do what we do. And we are going to do it on terms that respect what we have to offer. It was a simple thing to say. It had taken a long time to arrive at the place where it could be said. Her assistant, a young man named Lucas Adeyemi, who had been with her office for 2 years, and who had the gift of appearing at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right piece of information, knocked on the door and entered. "The council is asking whether you'll be available for a session at noon," he said. "Yes. They want to discuss the third term specifically." "I know. Tell them I'll be there and that my position on the third term is unchanged, but I'm happy to answer questions about implementation and mechanics." Lucas made a note. "Also, we're getting inbound signals from," he checked his tablet, "4 conclave member species, requesting to open communication on their own channels, not through the conclave relay." She turned from the window. "Which 4? He named them. She knew 3 immediately. 2 were small to mid-range civilizations that had relied heavily on human technical support for their life support infrastructure. The third was a species that had significant trade volume with Earth and had, according to the diplomatic record, voted for the Exile decree under what their internal communications suggested was significant pressure from the Keth Soren. The fourth was the Merath. "The Merath," she said. "Yes. Their message uses the phrase, preliminary inquiry into bilateral engagement possibilities. Their diplomatic language for, we want to talk, but we're not ready to commit to anything yet. That's fine. That's where these conversations start." She moved toward the door. "Respond to all 4. Tell them that the Sol Compact Diplomatic Office is open to preliminary discussions and will arrange contact within 48 hours. Standard acknowledgement, nothing more. No commitments in the reply." "Yes, Secretary General." She was almost through the door when she stopped. "Lucas." "Yes?" "The Merath delegate at the conclave, young, copper-scaled, sits in the upper tier. Do you know who that is?" He checked his tablet. "Deputy Delegate Senaway. She was appointed 3 months ago. Previous posting was in the Merath Scientific Exchange Program. She has a background in engineering, not politics." Amara thought about that for a moment. A Merath delegate from an engineering background, asking for a preliminary inquiry into bilateral engagement, the day after humanity had publicly listed the Merath atmospheric processing arrays as an example of human-built infrastructure for which full documentation was being released. A delegate who had seen, perhaps, exactly what the situation was, and had moved faster than her own government's diplomatic office would have recommended. "When we arrange the Merath preliminary discussion," Amara said, "I'd like to be personally on that call." Lucas made a note. She walked down the corridor toward her office, where a cold cup of tea was waiting on the desk, and the first of many, many messages was already stacking up in her inbox. And somewhere above her, through the ceiling and the sky and the atmosphere and the silent black distances between stars, humanity's words were still traveling outward, still arriving at receivers that had never heard them before, still asking every civilization in this galaxy to consider a very simple question: what happens when the species you exile doesn't leave? The answer was arriving in real time. She sat down at her desk, picked up the tea, found it cold, and drank it anyway. There was too much to do to wait for it to be warmed. Lieutenant Cassia Bren had been awake for 19 hours when the Dorothy cruisers appeared on her sensor screen. She had not expected to be awake. She had been scheduled for 6 hours of rest after her last watch rotation, had actually made it to her bunk, had been horizontally positioned for approximately 40 minutes before the ship's tactical alert system pulled her upright with the particular sharp-edged tone that bypassed every layer of tiredness and went straight to the part of the brain that dealt with immediate problems. She was in the tactical bay in under 3 minutes. Her boots were on correctly. She counted that as a personal achievement. "Report," she said, sliding into her station. Senior Sensor Operator Carl Webb, 28 years old, 4 years on the Resolute, spoke without turning from his screen. 3 vessels, confirmed Dorothy profile. Cruiser class, all 3. They dropped out of transit roughly 40 minutes ago, about 90,000 kilometers off the Meridian Star's position. The Meridian Star. Cassia pulled up the navigation overlay. The Meridian Star was a human cargo vessel, mid-sized, carrying textile equipment to a distribution point in the outer reach. She had a crew of 14. Her captain was a man named Yusuf Torres, who Cassia had met twice at port stops, and knew to be calm and experienced. Are they in contact with the Meridian Star? Yes. The Dorothy lead cruiser hailed them 8 minutes ago. We've been listening in on the open channel. And? The Dorothy are transmitting an impound order, citing the Conclave Exile decree. They say the Meridian Star has 40 minutes to stand down and accept a boarding team. Cassia looked at her screen for 3 seconds. What's Torres saying? Carl permitted himself a small, quiet smile. He's saying no. On the open channel she could hear it clearly. Yusuf Torres, captain of the Meridian Star, speaking in the level, unhurried tone of a man who had made a decision before the other side had finished talking. Dorothy vessel, this is the Meridian Star. I am aware of the Exile decree. I am also aware of the Sol Compact, which was broadcast on open channels 41 hours ago. The Sol Compact does not recognize conclave impound law as applicable to human vessels. My ship is not subject to your boarding order. I am transmitting this position to all active channels for the record. Additionally, please be advised that Rule 3 of the Sol Compact is now formally in effect as of this communication. There was a pause on the channel. Cassia could almost hear the Dorothy Admiral calculating whether the phrase Rule 3 is now in effect was a formal invocation or a bluff. She didn't give them time to decide. Helm, she said, set course for the Meridian Star's position. Dark transit. Minimum signature. I want us dropping out of transit within visual range of those cruisers, not behind them. Copy. Transit time is approximately 9 minutes at current parameters. Make it 8. She opened the ship-wide channel. Attention all stations. This is Lieutenant Bren. We are proceeding to assist the Meridian Star in the outer reach. The situation involves 3 Dorothy cruisers and an impound attempt under the Exile decree. All tactical stations, prepare for possible close-range positioning. This is not a drill, but the current assessment is that this will not require weapons fire. Repeat, the current assessment is that this will not require weapons fire. Stations. She closed the channel and started the targeting calculations before she finished her next breath. This was the thing about the Dorothy that most species in the Conclave hadn't fully worked out. They were methodical, and they were proud, and they were very good at operating within systems that had been set up in their favor. They were also accustomed to those systems working, which meant that when a system stopped working, their response time was slow. What the Dorothy did not know, what most of the galaxy did not know, because there had been no reason to publish it, was that human ships had been mapping the patrol and transit patterns of every Conclave member species' military presence for 11 years, catalogued under the quiet, bureaucratic title of the Outer Space Navigation Safety Database. Navigation Safety Database. In practice, it meant that Cassia Bren, sitting at her tactical station on the Resolute, could pull up the current location of every registered Dorothy military vessel in 3 different star systems and have weapons solutions calculated for all of them before the Dorothy Admiral had finished processing the phrase, Rule 3 is now in effect. She did not enjoy this. She was not the kind of person who enjoyed pointing weapons at anything, but she was the kind of person who believed very strongly that the best way to avoid actually using weapons was to make it thoroughly clear that you had them and knew exactly where to aim. The Resolute dropped out of dark transit at 8 minutes and 40 seconds, close enough to the Dorothy cruisers that their outline was visible through the forward observation window as a set of sharp angular shapes against the star field. Cassia was already on the open channel. Dorothy vessels, this is Lieutenant Cassia Bren, of the Earth Defense Ship Resolute. We are responding to the invocation of Rule 3 under the Sol Compact. The Meridian Star is under Earth Defense escort. Any attempt to board or seize that vessel will be treated as an act of aggression under the terms publicly stated by Secretary General Voss 41 hours ago. She waited. The Dorothy Admiral's voice came through. His translator rendered it in smooth, deep English. But Cassia had spent enough time around Dorothy comms to catch the undertone of something she would describe as rattled. Resolute. You are a single vessel. We are 3 cruisers. The mathematics of your situation should be clear. Cassia reached forward and pulled up the targeting display. She spoke her next words without any change in tone, because tone was information, and she was being very deliberate about what information she shared. Admiral, I'm going to share our tactical display with you right now. Open channel, full transparency, nothing hidden. You're going to see that we currently have targeting solutions on your 3 cruisers. You're also going to see that we have targeting solutions on 6 additional Darathi vessels in 2 other systems. I want to be very precise. Those 6 vessels are the Darathi Patrol Wing currently conducting routine operations in the Selkan Corridor, and the Darathi Escort Group currently traveling through Transit Point 9. None of them are doing anything aggressive. We've simply had their positions tracked for some time. She transmitted the display. Silence on the channel. She counted 12 full seconds. You're bluffing, the Admiral said, but the word landed with the hollow sound of something said because it needed to be said, not because the speaker believed it. Admiral, we built the Navigation Safety Database. We've been updating it for 11 years. If you'd like me to demonstrate by describing the precise location of your second escort group down to the kilometer, I can do that. But I'd rather not spend our time on demonstrations when the actual issue is simple. The Meridian Star is not being boarded. That's the only thing that matters in this conversation. Another silence. Longer this time. Carl Webb, who was watching the Darathi fleet signature on his sensors with the focused attention of someone watching a storm that might or might not turn, said quietly, "Lead cruiser is signaling its escorts. Looks like a formation adjustment. They're pulling back from the Meridian Star." Cassia kept her eyes on the communications panel. The Admiral's voice returned. "This is not over." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But the Meridian Star is free to proceed, and I think we both know that today ends here." She paused. "For what it's worth, Admiral, I understand why you tried. You were given a legal order by your government, which was following conclave law. I'm not holding that against your crews. But the law you were enforcing doesn't apply to us anymore. That's going to take some adjustment for everyone." She closed the channel. The room exhaled. Nina Walsh's voice came through from navigation. "No, that was the Audacity. Different ship." Cassia shook the crossed thought loose. "Carl Webb, right here in this room, said, 'The Meridian Star is moving. Torres has set course for his original delivery point.' Good. Keep our position until they're clear of the Darathi fleet's sensor range. And then? Then we follow them. At a distance." Carl nodded. There was something else that needed to happen. Cassia pulled up a secondary channel and found the Uvari journalist embedded on Deck 3. A slim, serious being named Oren Lee, who had been given access to the Resolute as part of what the diplomatic office had called a transparency initiative, which was a polite way of saying they wanted a non-human observer to see exactly what Earth's new response doctrine looked like in practice. "Oren Lee," she said. "Lieutenant." The journalist's voice was careful and very alert. "Did you get all of that? Every word, every display readout, full recording, multiple backups. Good. Transmit when ready." "I have already transmitted," Oren Lee said, "on 17 different channels, including 3 that the Keth Sorun monitor." Cassia permitted herself a small and private satisfaction. "Thank you." She sat back in her chair. On the sensor screen, the 3 Darathi cruisers were holding their adjusted positions, no longer moving toward the Meridian Star. The 6 Darathi vessels in the Selkan Corridor and at Transit Point 9 were continuing their routine operations, completely unaware that they had been part of a conversation that had just resolved a standoff without a single shot fired. Cassia thought about what the Darathi Admiral had said. This is not over. He wasn't wrong. Back on Earth, the Council was already receiving reports. Philip Grant was briefing the Secretary General. Owen Marsh was on a call with 3 different species diplomatic contacts who had watched Oren Lee's live transmission and were, by various accounts, processing it at different speeds. 2 of those species, according to the early read, were already drafting requests for bilateral discussions with the United Earth Assembly. Not readmission requests to the conclave. Bilateral discussions. With humanity directly. Cassia made a note in the tactical log. She wrote it plainly, in the style the log required, which was factual and without emotional language. Dorothy impound attempt on Meridian Star successfully denied. No weapons discharged. Meridian Star proceeding to original destination. Resolute holding escort position. Then, in the comment field that no one usually read, she added one more line. She wrote, "They called us unpredictable. That was the old version of us. The new version is actually worse. We are completely consistent." She filed the log. Outside the Resolute, in the enormous and indifferent dark, the Meridian Star moved steadily toward its delivery point, carrying textile equipment, its 14 crew members going about their work, its captain presumably drinking something hot, and watching his navigation screen with the calm of a man who had been right about something important and was being dignified about it. Somewhere behind them, 3 Dorothy cruisers sat in the space they had occupied when they arrived, not pursuing, not retreating, simply existing in the new reality of a galaxy where the rules had just changed in a way that nobody had put to a vote. Which felt, Cassia thought, like exactly the right way for this particular change to happen. On the secondary screen, new signals were appearing. Other human vessels in the outer reach, checking in on the open frequency that the Sol Compact had designated for human fleet coordination. She counted 11 check-ins in the first 15 minutes. None of them were panicked. All of them were precise. She answered each one personally. This was, she was coming to understand, what the new job looked like. Not war, not the dramatic, crashing clash of fleets that species had been writing stories about for millennia. Just this, showing up, being counted, being clear, and not going away. 46 ships. 11 to 200 crew each. A Secretary General with a broadcast that had reached 340 alien species. An ambassador who had walked out of an exile chamber without saying a word, and an entire civilization that had heard the door close behind her and started building something new before the echo stopped. The Dorothy would report back to the conclave. The conclave would convene. The Keth Sorun Grand Speaker would say something sharp and formal about precedence and law. And humanity would be there for all of it. Not as exiles, not as applicants, not as a variable to be managed. As the authors of their own presence in the galaxy. The Resolute held its position. The stars kept watch. And somewhere in Geneva, a woman who had not slept in 30 hours picked up a cold mug of tea, took a long breath, and started reading the first of what would eventually become 61 formal requests for direct bilateral discussions with the United Earth Assembly. 61. And more arriving every hour. The hour that followed the standoff was quieter than Cassia expected, but not in a comfortable way. It was the quiet of a situation that had resolved but hadn't settled, the space between the moment when someone stops pushing and the moment when everyone is sure the pushing has stopped. The Dorothy cruisers held their new position, 8,000 kilometers off the Meridian Star's stern, not pursuing, not departing, just present, watching. Carl Webb tracked them without comment, noting each micro-adjustment in their formation, with the practiced attention of someone who understood that fleet movements conveyed information, even when nothing was being said on the open channel. "They're not leaving," he observed. "No," Cassia agreed. "Staying to observe? Staying to report." She pulled up the communication log on the secondary screen. "They're transmitting back to Dorothy Command on an encrypted channel right now. Have been since we dropped out of transit." "What do you think they're saying?" "I think they're saying that the navigation database was real." She paused. "And that someone needs to tell the Admiralty that the humans have been tracking their fleet for 11 years. Carl was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be an uncomfortable report to write." "Yes," she said. "It is." She thought about the Dorothy Admiral. She didn't know his name. He had not identified himself in the exchange, which was standard for Dorothy military protocol in contested situations. She thought about what it felt like to be on the other side of that conversation, to give an order that seemed legally and militarily reasonable, and to discover, in a period of roughly 4 minutes, that the geometry of the situation was entirely different from what you had been briefed to expect. She didn't feel satisfaction about it. She felt something more like quiet recognition. The Dorothi weren't the enemy. They were a military arm following orders from a government following the direction of a governing body that had made a decision. The people in those cruisers were doing their jobs. They had encountered a situation their jobs hadn't prepared them for. She had been in situations like that herself. The difference was that her side had done the preparation. Oren Lee appeared at the entrance to the tactical bay. That small, serious Uvari journalist, with the very good recording equipment, and the very careful eyes. "May I ask a question?" Oren Lee said. "Go ahead. The targeting data you showed the Dorothi Admiral, the 6 vessels in the other systems, did you actually have solutions on all of them?" Cassia looked at the journalist for a moment. "Yes. You could have engaged all of them simultaneously." "I didn't say we could engage them simultaneously. I said we had targeting solutions. Those are different things. Having the targeting data means we know where they are, and can calculate a solution. Whether or not we would act on it is a completely separate question." Oren Lee seemed to consider this. "And would you have?" "The Admiral didn't board the Meridian Star," Cassia said. "So we don't need to answer that." The journalist was quiet for a moment longer. Then, "You're good at giving answers that are completely true without being complete." Cassia almost smiled. "We've had some practice." Oren Lee returned to the observation area, and Cassia turned back to her screens. The Meridian Star's signal was clean and steady, moving at normal cruise speed toward its original delivery point. Yusuf Torres had not made any further transmissions on the open channel after his initial invocation of Rule 3. He was simply navigating. He was going where he had always been going, doing what he had always done, and the fact that 3 warships had briefly tried to stop him and had ultimately not done so was, from his behavior on the sensor screen, being treated as a minor operational delay. That was the right way to handle it, Cassia thought. Not triumphant, not aggressive in the aftermath. Just moving forward, because that was the plan, and the plan had not changed. She reached for her communications panel and sent a brief message to the Meridian Star on the human compact frequency. It said, "Escort is holding 1 light hour behind your current position. Proceed at your own pace." Torres's response came back 90 seconds later. It said, "Understood. The coffee here is terrible, but the crew is good. Thanks for the company." She filed it in the log. Outside, the stars held their positions with the patience of things that had seen this kind of moment before, and would see it again. And the Dorothi cruisers continued their silent watching, and the Resolute kept its distance, and nobody fired a single thing. That was the story. That was, she thought, exactly the story that needed to be told. The grand chamber of the Galactic Conclave looked exactly as it had a year ago. Same curved tiers, same pale stone floor, worn smooth by the passage of more species than any single mind could hold in memory. Same cool blue-white light that fell from sources embedded in the ceiling and made everyone look a little like they were underwater. Same resonant silence that the room produced naturally, as if the architecture itself was designed to make the people inside it feel the weight of what was being said. The Archivist Prime stood at the same dais, but almost everything else was different. "My name is Yael Doran, and I walked back into that room 12 months after the vote that was supposed to end humanity's place in galactic civilization. I walked in through the same entrance I had used the last time, past the same ceremonial pillars, past the same 2 security officers in pale gray uniforms. One of them recognized me. I could tell by the way his eyes moved. He said nothing. I said nothing. I kept walking. I was not alone this time. Behind me came Philip Grant, representing the Secretary General's office. Behind him came Owen Marsh from the Diplomatic Division. Behind him came 4 other human representatives, each of them carrying documentation, each of them wearing the small silver pin on their lapel that identified them as members of the Sol Compact delegation. 6 humans walking into the grand chamber of the Galactic Conclave, which had exiled humanity by a vote of 417 to 0, 12 months and 11 days ago. We took our seats in the observation area, not the exiled party dock where I had stood last time, alone, not permitted to vote. The observation area, which was the space reserved for non-member parties attending a session at their own request. Because that was the first thing we had clarified, through a careful, methodical, 3-week exchange of diplomatic communications with the Conclave Administrative Office. We had not been readmitted. We had not applied for readmission. We were attending as representatives of the Sol Compact, a separate interstellar body, which had requested the right to address this session on a matter of mutual interest. The Conclave had debated whether to grant the request for 9 days. They had ultimately agreed, by a margin of 206 to 141, with 70 abstentions. I had noted the 70 abstentions. 70, where a year ago there had been one. Things had been moving. The session opened in the usual way. The Archivist Prime announced the agenda. There were 3 items. The last one was listed simply as Address from the Sol Compact Delegation. Keth Sorun, Grand Speaker, Sorun Veth, not Sorun Keth, who had retired from the position 4 months earlier under circumstances that the official record described as voluntary restructuring, sat in the high seat of the Keth Sorun delegation. He was younger than his predecessor, with the same hammered bronze quality to his face, but his eyes were more cautious, the eyes of someone who had watched the past year happen and had drawn careful conclusions. The first 2 agenda items were handled efficiently. I listened, made notes, said nothing. Owen Marsh sat beside me, very still, the way he always was in rooms where he was paying close attention. Then the Archivist Prime said, "We will now hear from the Sol Compact delegation," and I stood up. I had given many speeches in that building. I had given them in chambers like this one, and in smaller rooms, and in private conversations that would never appear in any official record. I had spent 12 years learning how to speak in ways that the Conclave understood, in their language, within their framework, according to their expectations. I had written this address differently. "Thank you," I said, which was unusual enough in that context that it caught a small, rippling attention from the tiers above. I want to begin with a fact and then a question. I looked up at the assembled delegations. The fact is this. In the 12 months since the Exile Decree, 63 species have entered into direct bilateral agreements with the Sol Compact. 63. Not with the Conclave as an intermediary. Directly, with humanity. Medical partnerships, technical exchange agreements, trade frameworks, and in 2 cases, full mutual defense arrangements. The scope and content of all 63 agreements are available in the documentation we have provided to the Conclave archive. A stir in the room, not loud. The Conclave was too practiced for loud reactions, but a stir. The question is this: how did that happen? I let the question sit for a moment. The answer, in our assessment, is that the Exile Decree created a vacuum. The Conclave removed humanity from the member framework, which meant that species which had previously engaged with humanity through Conclave-approved channels were suddenly engaging with us outside those channels. There was no structure to govern those engagements. So we built one, the Sol Compact, and the species that wanted to keep working with us joined it, because the alternative was losing access to things they had come to rely on. Sorun Veth's expression had not changed, but he was watching me with the careful stillness of a person processing information they had not expected to receive in the form it was arriving. "We are not here today to apply for readmission," I said. "I want to be completely clear about that, because I know there are members of this body who are expecting exactly that, and I want to save everyone the confusion. We are here to present a proposal." I opened the document in front of me, though I didn't look at it. I had memorized every word. The proposal is called the Open Compact. It is a framework for a new interstellar governance body. Not a replacement for the Conclave. The Conclave can continue to exist and operate however it chooses. The Open Compact is a parallel structure, open to any species that wishes to join, built on 4 principles that differ from the Conclave's current framework. I listed them. First, No permanent seats. All governing positions are term-limited, elected, and rotatable. No species holds a position of structural authority in perpetuity. Second, no exile mechanism. Disputes between members are resolved through mediation, arbitration, and in extreme cases, suspension with defined reinstatement criteria. There is no provision for permanent removal. We believe that a governance body that can permanently remove members from the community of civilization will always be vulnerable to using that mechanism for political, rather than safety reasons. Third, weighted contribution. Voting power in the open compact is proportional to a species' measurable contribution to the collective: medical support, technical development, infrastructure, and verified aid to other member species. Not military size, not age of civilization. Contribution. Fourth, open documentation. All sessions, all votes, all deliberations are recorded and published. There are no closed councils and no private votes. Every species in the open compact knows what every other member is saying. The room was genuinely quiet now. Not the quiet of discomfort, but the quality of silence that comes when a large group of people is thinking at the same time. The open compact currently has 63 founding member species. I continued. We are opening formal applications to any additional species that wish to join. Conclave members are welcome to hold dual membership. There is no rule in either body preventing that. We have specifically designed it that way. I set down the document. I want to say something personal now, and I want to ask the conclave's indulgence for it. I looked at Sorun Veth. A year ago, your predecessor said that a species which had survived its own extinction 7 times was not a credential but a warning. I have been thinking about that statement for 12 months, and I want to offer a different frame. I spoke slowly and clearly. Every survival we have achieved has produced something. After each extinction level event, biological, environmental, social, something was built that had not existed before. A medical technique, a social structure, an engineering solution, a way of talking to each other that managed to hold across the things that tried to break us. We have survived not because we are indestructible, but because we cannot stop building. You called that a variable. We call it a practice. I closed the document folder in front of me. The open compact is built on the belief that the galaxy is better when more voices are in the room, not fewer. That exclusion does not create safety. It creates the kind of quiet that exists just before something breaks. We are not asking you to agree with that belief today. We are asking you to watch what 63 species and one very stubborn planet can build when the door is open. I sat down. The Archivist Prime waited, as it always did, for responses from the floor. Sorun Veth spoke first. Ambassador Doran. His voice was measured, not hostile, not warm. The voice of a person navigating new territory with care. I would like to ask you a question that is not on the official record. The Archivist Prime made a small gesture indicating that this was permitted. Why? Sorun Veth said. You have 63 species. You have a framework. You have demonstrated over the past year that you do not need the Conclave's permission to operate effectively in this galaxy. You have the resources, the relationships, and the legal standing to proceed entirely independently. Why come back here? Why address this body at all? The room waited. I thought of Rin Osei, holding the audacity and position in the dark, a ship full of Uvari medical equipment, and a crew of 11 people who had trusted her when she told them to wait. I thought of Cassia Bren, sitting at her targeting station on the Resolute, speaking to a Dorathi admiral in the calm, even voice of someone who had already decided the outcome. I thought of Amara Voss, standing up from her chair during a broadcast, which she hadn't planned to do, because the moment required it. I thought of Priel Vaughn, who had abstained. Because the door being open matters more than being right, I said. We could have built the open compact and never come back here. Some of my colleagues recommended exactly that. But we are not interested in demonstrating that we don't need you. We are interested in building something that works, and something that works better with more participants than fewer. I looked at him directly. Also, And I will be honest about this. Some of the species in this room still have technical dependencies on human-specific engineering knowledge that we have not fully transferred. The Uvari biomedical calibration systems, the Dorothy transit lane calculation software, the Marath atmospheric processing arrays. We built those things, and the documentation to operate them independently is in the Open Compact's technical archive, available to any member species on request. I paused, including conclave members who joined through dual membership. Sorun Veth was quiet for a long moment. You released the documentation. We published it 3 months ago. Every species that has a dependency on human-built infrastructure now has the information they need to operate it without us. You gave it away. We made it available. There's a difference. Giving something away implies it was previously being withheld as leverage. We don't operate on leverage. We operate on contribution. Another silence. Longer. Owen Marsh, beside me, was looking straight ahead at a point on the wall, which was what he did when he was working very hard not to show what he was thinking. I could read the slight tension around his eyes. He thought I had gone too far. He might have been right. He usually was about these things. But I had not come here to negotiate from a position of contained strength. I had come here to show something. "Ambassador," said a voice from the upper tier. I looked up. It was a Marath delegate, young, copper-scaled, with the large and careful eyes of someone who had joined the delegation recently. The Open Compact's weighted contribution system. How is contribution measured? Good question. Someone had prepared her well. Independently audited annual reports from each member species, I said, covering medical support delivered, technical assistance rendered, infrastructure contribution, and verified aid in cases of member species emergency. The audit is conducted by a rotating panel of 3 species who are not currently recipients of aid from the species being assessed. It's not a perfect system, but it is a transparent one, and it cannot be modified without a full member vote. The Marath delegate nodded slowly. 3 more delegations asked questions. The session ran 40 minutes over its scheduled end. The Archivist Prime, which had governed this chamber for longer than any of the current delegates had been alive, said very little. It observed and recorded, and when the session finally closed, it looked at me for exactly 3 seconds before returning its attention to the formal proceedings of closing. I could not read its expression. I was not sure it had one, but it was watching. In the corridor outside the Grand Chamber, after the session, as Philip was quietly reviewing his notes and Owen was already on a call, a single figure approached me. It was Priel Vaughn, of the Uvari delegation. He was older than when I had last seen him, or perhaps simply more tired in the way that comes from a year of being the person who voted differently from everyone else. He stopped in front of me and was quiet for a moment. "The bioscanners arrived on time," he said. "I know, Captain Osei sent confirmation. The Northern Colony completed its medical assessment cycle without interruption." I heard. He looked at me with the amber eyes that I had watched stare at a point above my head on the day of the Exile vote. "I did not vote against you," he said. "No. But I did not vote for you either." "No," I said again. "I did not know what you would do. I thought—" He paused. "I thought you would be angry. I thought there would be a response of anger." I looked at him. "We were angry," I said. "Anger is allowed. What you choose to do with it is the question." He was quiet again for a moment. Then, "I will bring the Uvari delegation's application for Open Compact membership to our council next week." I did not let my expression change. "The application process is open. We'd be glad to have the discussion." He inclined his head, which was the Uvari version of a nod, and walked back toward the chamber entrance. I stood in the corridor for a moment, alone. Philip and Owen were still occupied. The security officers in their pale gray uniforms were at their posts at the far end of the hall. 1 year ago, I had walked out of this corridor in silence, holding a condolence crystal I had never opened. I still had it, actually. It was on my desk at the diplomatic residence. I kept it there not as a reminder of defeat, but as a reminder of the specific moment when I had understood something important. The conclave had handed it to me, expecting that I would receive it as an ending. I had received it as a starting point. The data crystal was still sealed. I had never opened it. Maybe I never would. I pulled out my notepad, the physical one, with the pen, and made a new list. It had 4 items on it. The first was, follow up on Uvari membership application. The second was, transmit technical documentation to Dorothy admin office. The third was, call Rin. The fourth was, sleep. I looked at the list. Then I added a 5th item, remind everyone that this is not the end of something. Because it wasn't, not even close. The Open Compact had 63 members. In 6 months it would have more. In 2 years, if the projections held, the number would exceed the Conclave's current membership, not because humanity was the most powerful or the most ancient or the most correct, but because we had built something that worked, and we had left the door open, and we had not made anyone beg to walk through it. The Galactic Conclave was 11,000 years old, and very certain of itself. It had seen species rise and fall. It had exiled 23 civilizations in its history, by the official count, and not one of them had ever come back to address the chamber as the representative of a competing interstellar body. We were the first. We probably would not be the last. Philip appeared at my elbow, closing his notebook. The Keth Soren delegation has requested a private meeting, he said. Of course they have. Tomorrow morning, before the second session. All right. What do you expect they'll say? I thought about it. Soren Veth, with his careful eyes and his measured voice, navigating a position that his predecessor had put him in, by making a very large and very public decision that had not produced the result anyone expected. They'll ask what it would take to bring the Open Compact into a formal relationship with the Conclave, I said. A bridge structure. They'll want to avoid the appearance of 2 competing bodies operating in the same galaxy. They'll frame it as stability and coherence. And what will we say? I capped my pen. We'll say we're open to the conversation, that we don't have conditions for a conversation, but that the Open Compact structure is not negotiable, and any relationship with the Conclave has to be genuinely equal, not a readmission by another name. Philip nodded. And if they push for concessions? Then we remind them, very politely, that 63 species joined the Open Compact not because we asked them to, but because they wanted to. That's not leverage. That's information. He almost smiled. Almost. We walked toward the exit of the Conclave complex together. Outside, the sky of Conclave Station 7 was the color of deep water, and the 3 moons were in their various stages. The same sky I had looked at a year ago, for 4 seconds, before I went to work. I looked at it again. The Archivist Prime had read the founding charter of the Open Compact into the session record that morning, a procedural requirement for any formal address from a non-member body. Earth's name had appeared first on the charter, listed not as a member state in the usual sense but as a co-author. The Archivist Prime had read it aloud, in its resonant, sourceless voice, without any change in tone. But it had read it. 11,000 years of interstellar history, and this was the first time the Conclave had read a document into its session record that had been written by a species it had voted to exile. That felt like something worth noting. I wrote it down in my notepad. Then I put the notepad away and walked out into the station air, toward the shuttle that would take me to the human diplomatic residence, where there was a cold cup of tea waiting for me, and a sealed data crystal sitting on the corner of my desk, and a list of 63 bilateral agreements that needed my signature by the end of the week, not counting the Uvari application that would be coming next week. 64. They had voted to exile Earth. We had taken the exile and built something real with it, and kept the door open behind us. Not out of forgiveness, not even out of generosity, out of confidence. We knew they would come back. We had always known. A species that had survived 7 extinction events, that had built medicine out of disaster, and engineering out of desperation, and diplomacy out of 1,000 years of talking to itself, was not a species that sat quietly in a corner while the galaxy decided its future without it. We were the variable, and the variable It turned out, was the one thing the equation couldn't solve without. The shuttle doors closed. The station lights moved past the window in their steady, patient rhythm. I opened my notepad to the fifth item on the list. Remind everyone that this is not the end of something. I read it once. Then I crossed it out and wrote something different. I wrote, "Tell them it is the beginning," and closed the notepad, and went home.